Case the number 10, Ettore Majorana in the Vatican Manuscripts. In March 1938, Ettore Majorana, one of Italy's most brilliant theoretical physicists, boarded a ship from Palermo to Naples and was never seen again. The official story calls it suicide or voluntary disappearance. But colleagues whispered about what Majorana had been working on in the months before he vanished. According to fellow physicist Emilio Segre, Majorana had been spending unusual amounts of time at the Vatican Library, supposedly researching medieval astronomical texts. He told a friend he was working on translating a cipher found in a 15th century manuscript attributed to a monk named Brother Anselmo of Padua. The text allegedly contained mathematical formulas that Majorana claimed were centuries ahead of their time. No copy of Majorana's translation has ever surfaced. The Vatican has never confirmed the existence of any Brother Anselmo manuscript. However, Majorana's sister testified that in the weeks before his disappearance, he burned several notebooks and became increasingly paranoid, asking her if she believed some knowledge was too dangerous for humanity. Skeptics point out that Majorana was known for erratic behavior and depression. His colleagues described him as brilliant but unstable. The most likely explanation is a mental breakdown leading to suicide, possibly by drowning himself during the ferry crossing. His body was simply never recovered, but conspiracy theorists note that Majorana's disappearance coincided with the international race to develop nuclear weapons. Some claim the Vatican texts contain formulas Majorana recognized as relevant to atomic energy. They believe he either fled to prevent his work being weaponized or was silenced by parties who wanted to control his discoveries. The truth likely lies somewhere between genius and breakdown. But that manuscript, if it existed, has never been found. Case number 9, Wilfrid Voynich and the manuscript that bears his name. In 1912, Polish book dealer Wilfrid Voynich purchased a collection of manuscripts from a Jesuit college in Italy. Among them was a codex that would become the most studied unreadable book in history. But what happened to Voynich in the years after acquiring it remains curiously overlooked. The Voynich manuscript contains approximately 240 vellum pages of unknown script, accompanied by bizarre illustrations of unidentifiable plants, astronomical diagrams, and naked women bathing in green liquid. Radiocarbon dating places its creation between 1404 and 1438. No one has successfully decoded it despite a century of attempts by military cryptographers, linguists, and artificial intelligence. Voynich spent his remaining years obsessively studying the text. According to his wife Ethel, he became convinced he was close to understanding its purpose. He died in 1930 without publishing any translation. His notes on the manuscript have never been located despite extensive searches by scholars. Ethel inherited the book but refused to discuss her husband's research, eventually selling the manuscript in 1961. The skeptical view holds that Voynich was simply a book dealer who recognized the commercial value of a mysterious text. His failure to decode it was simply that, a failure. His notes were likely destroyed or lost through ordinary means. But certain researchers point to letters Voynich wrote to colleagues in 1929, his final year of serious research. In these letters, he mentioned discovering a pattern that revealed the manuscript was not meant to be read sequentially. Shortly after sending these letters, he abruptly stopped all correspondence about the project. 3 months later, he was dead of undisclosed causes at age 65. Perhaps Wilfrid Voynich was just an antiquarian who bit off more than he could chew, or perhaps he decoded something he wished he had not. Case number 8, Athanasius Kircher's Egyptian translations. Athanasius Kircher was a 17th century Jesuit priest considered one of the most learned men in Europe. He published 40 books on subjects ranging from geology to medicine. His most ambitious project was translating Egyptian hieroglyphics, a language that had been dead for over 1,000 years. He claimed complete success. He was completely wrong. When Jean-François Champollion actually cracked hieroglyphics using the Rosetta Stone in 1822, scholars discovered Kircher's translations were pure invention. He had essentially made everything up. The academic world dismissed him as a fraud or fool. Case closed. But here is where the story gets strange. Kircher's papers, housed at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, contain a section that archivists have never fully cataloged. In 1999, researcher Paula Finlan noted that Kircher's correspondence from 1665 onward shows an abrupt personality change. His letters become cryptic, referencing truths that cannot be spoken and knowledge reserved for future ages. In 1667, Kircher ceased all work on Egyptian texts. He never explained why. He spent his remaining 13 years studying volcanoes and plague, subjects far removed from his linguistic obsessions. Colleagues reported he refused to discuss Egypt entirely. The mainstream view is that Kircher was a well-meaning scholar, limited by his era's lack of linguistic tools. His later silence simply reflects a man moving on to new interests. But alternative researchers suggest Kircher actually did decode something in the Egyptian text, something the Church deemed heretical. They point to his sudden pivot away from the subject and his cryptic late correspondence as evidence he was pressured into silence. Whatever Athanasius Kircher found or did not find in those hieroglyphics, he took the full truth to his grave in 1680. Case number 7, William Romain Newbold and the Roger Bacon cipher. In 1921, Professor William Romain Newbold of the University of Pennsylvania announced he had decoded the Voynich manuscript. His claim was extraordinary. He said the 13th century scientist Roger Bacon had written the text using a microscopic cipher system that revealed knowledge of cells, galaxies, and biological structures centuries before such discoveries were made. Newbold presented his findings to the American Philosophical Society. He demonstrated how each character in the manuscript contained tiny marks visible only under magnification. These marks, he said, formed a secondary alphabet that unlocked Bacon's secrets. The academic world was initially impressed. Then Newbold died suddenly in 1926, before publishing his complete translation. He was 60 years old and had shown no signs of serious illness. His death certificate listed heart failure, though colleagues noted he had seemed healthy weeks earlier. His research papers were gathered by his student Roland Kent, who attempted to verify the methodology. Kent eventually concluded the microscopic marks were simply cracks in old ink, not intentional writing. By 1931, philologist John Manley had thoroughly debunked Newbold's system, demonstrating it could produce any desired message from any text. The academic world moved on, and Newbold became a cautionary tale about wishful thinking. Skeptics rightfully point out that Newbold was simply wrong. His method was flawed, his translations were imaginary, and his death was natural if poorly timed. But certain researchers note that Newbold's personal papers, donated to the University of Pennsylvania, contain a sealed section he instructed should remain unopened until 2026. The university has confirmed the seal exists, but declined to speculate about its contents. William Romain Newbold may have been chasing shadows, or he may have found something he knew the world was not ready to see. Case number 6. Robert Temple and the Dogon Mystery. In 1976, American author Robert Temple published The Serious Mystery, a book that would make him famous and nearly destroy his career. Temple claimed to have decoded the astronomical knowledge of the Dogon people of Mali, revealing they possessed information about the star Sirius that should have been impossible without telescopes. The Dogon, according to Temple's research, knew that Sirius had an invisible companion star. They knew this companion was incredibly dense. They knew its orbital period was 50 years. All of this proved accurate when astronomers confirmed Sirius B's existence. Temple argued the Dogon received this knowledge from extraterrestrial visitors thousands of years ago. The book became an international sensation. It also attracted intense scrutiny. Anthropologists pointed out that French researchers had contacted the Dogon in the 1930s, possibly contaminating their traditions with Western astronomical knowledge. Temple's sources were questioned. His methodology was attacked. Then Robert Temple went quiet. For nearly a decade after his book's publication, he made few public appearances and gave almost no interviews. He later claimed he received threats and that his phone was tapped. In his 1998 revised edition, he included documentation of what he called harassment by unknown parties. The mainstream view is that Temple was embarrassed by legitimate criticism and withdrew to avoid further scrutiny. The Dogon mystery has been largely explained by cultural contamination, but Temple insists the attacks on his work were coordinated in ways that went beyond normal academic debate. He claims his research touched on classified information about ancient astronomical texts that certain agencies preferred remain obscure. Robert Temple is still alive and still defending his work. Whether his silence was strategic or coerced remains an open question. Case number 5, James Churchward and the Nakal Tablets. In 1926, retired British Colonel James Churchward published The Lost Continent of Mu, claiming to have decoded ancient stone tablets that proved a Pacific civilization predated all known human history. He said he learned to read these tablets, called the Nakal, from a Hindu priest in India during the 1880s. According to Churchward, the tablets described Mu, a continent of 64 million people that sank beneath the Pacific Ocean 12,000 years ago. Survivors spread across the globe, founding Egypt, India, and Central America. Churchward claimed he spent 50 years translating the tablets before publishing his findings. He produced 5 books on Mu between 1926 and 1935. They sold extremely well. They were also completely impossible to verify. Churchward never revealed the location of the tablets. He never named the priest who taught him. He never provided any physical evidence whatsoever. Scholars dismissed him as a fantasist capitalizing on the era's appetite for lost civilizations. His geological claims were nonsense. His linguistics were invented. His career before the books remains murky, with conflicting accounts of his military service. Churchward died in 1936, 1 year after his final book. His personal papers were donated to the San Diego Public Library, where researchers discovered thousands of pages of unpublished notes. Among them were letters from the 1920s in which Churchward wrote to colleagues that he had found the tablet's true origin but been warned never to reveal it. Most likely, James Churchward was a creative fraud who got lost in his own mythology. But those letters suggest either a con artist covering his tracks or a man who genuinely believed he had uncovered something too dangerous to share. Case number 4, Zecharia Sitchin and the Sumerian Tablets. Zecharia Sitchin was a Russian-born American author who claimed to read ancient Sumerian tablets that mainstream scholars had mistranslated for decades. Beginning with the 12th Planet in 1976, Sitchin published 13 books arguing that Sumerian texts described extraterrestrial beings called the Anunnaki, who created humanity through genetic engineering. Sitchin's translations were wildly at odds with academic Sumerology. He claimed words scholars translated as gods actually meant those who came from heaven. He said references to divine creation were literal descriptions of alien genetic experiments. His books sold millions of copies worldwide. Professional Assyriologists dismissed Sitchin entirely. Michael Heiser, a scholar of ancient Semitic languages, systematically demonstrated that Sitchin's translations were linguistically impossible. Sitchin, who had a degree in economics rather than ancient languages, never engaged seriously with academic criticism. But here is what most people overlook. In the final decade of his life, Sitchin shifted his focus. He became obsessed with obtaining DNA testing of a specific Sumerian queen's remains, a project he called the Goddess of Ur Genome Project. He claimed genetic analysis would prove his theories about human-alien hybridization. No museum ever granted his request. Sitchin died in 2010 at age 90 without achieving this goal. His final manuscript, reportedly containing what he called decisive evidence, was never published. His estate has not released its contents. The straightforward explanation is that Sitchin was a profitable pseudoscientist who invented translations to support a predetermined narrative. His DNA project was a publicity stunt that museums wisely ignored. But Sitchin's followers point to his unpublished final work and ask why, after 13 best-selling books, he felt the need for biological proof. What did he discover that made textual evidence insufficient? Case number 3, René Schwaller de Lubicz and the Temple of Luxor. René Schwaller de Lubicz was a French mystic and Egyptologist who spent 15 years from 1937 to 1952 studying the Temple of Luxor. His conclusion was radical. He claimed the temple's measurements encoded sophisticated mathematical and anatomical knowledge that proved ancient Egypt possessed scientific understanding far beyond what mainstream history acknowledged. His 1,000-page work, The Temple of Man, published in 1957, argued that the temple was designed as a representation of the human body. He provided detailed measurements showing correspondences between architectural proportions and human anatomy. He also claimed to have decoded inscriptions that revealed the Egyptians understood the precession of the equinoxes and other astronomical phenomena. Academic Egyptology largely ignored Schwaller de Lubitsch. His methodology was unconventional, his mystical beliefs colored his interpretations, and his association with far-right political movements made him toxic to mainstream scholars. But the strangest part of Schwaller de Lubitsch's story came after publication. In 1958, he abruptly ceased all research and public engagement. He spent his final 3 years in complete seclusion in Switzerland, refusing visitors and destroying much of his correspondence. He died in 1961 without explaining his withdrawal. His wife Aisha later wrote that her husband had decoded sections of Luxor inscriptions that he refused to publish. She said he believed the knowledge was restricted and should remain so. She never specified what the forbidden content contained. Most scholars assume Schwaller de Lubitsch was an eccentric who imposed patterns onto random architectural features. His silence was likely the result of age, disappointment with his work's reception, or declining health. But those who have studied his unpublished notes, now held by private collectors, report that certain sections are written in a cipher he created specifically to protect the information. The cipher has never been broken. Case number 2, John Dee and the Enochian language. John Dee was Queen Elizabeth I's court astrologer, mathematician, and one of the most learned men in 16th century England. Beginning in 1582, Dee and his associate Edward Kelly conducted hundreds of sessions attempting to communicate with angels through a crystal ball. These sessions produced the Enochian language, an entire linguistic system the angels allegedly dictated letter by letter. The Enochian tablets contain vocabulary, grammar, and what Dee called calls or keys, texts meant to be spoken aloud to invoke spiritual powers. Dee recorded everything meticulously in his diaries. The system is remarkably consistent, with internal linguistic logic that modern analysis confirms is more complex than any known invented language before the 20th century. Mainstream scholars generally attribute Enochian to Edward Kelly, a known forger with questionable credentials. They suggest Kelly either invented the language to maintain his position with Dee, or genuinely believed he was channeling divine communication during self-induced trances. But Dee's later life raises questions. After Kelly's death in 1597, Dee continued studying the Enochian materials alone. His diaries from this period, portions of which were lost in a fire and recovered partially in 1662, reference translations he was working on. He wrote of terrible knowledge and warnings against speaking certain calls aloud. John Dee died in poverty in 1608 or 1609, the exact date unknown. His library, once the largest in England, was dispersed. Many manuscripts vanished entirely. The complete Enochian corpus has never been recovered. Perhaps John Dee was simply the victim of a clever fraudster. Perhaps Kelly invented a language so sophisticated that it fooled one of England's greatest minds. Or perhaps they decoded something genuinely forbidden, and Dee spent his final years trying to forget what he had learned. Case number 1, Constance Mary Pott and the Shakespeare Ciphers. In 1891, Constance Mary Pott published a book titled Francis Bacon and His Secret Society, arguing that Sir Francis Bacon had hidden messages throughout the works attributed to William Shakespeare. This was not a new claim, but Pott's methodology was unprecedented in its rigor, and what happened to her afterward has never been adequately explained. Pott developed a cipher system based on Bacon's known writings on cryptography. She demonstrated what she claimed were consistent patterns across the Shakespeare folios, patterns that, when decoded, revealed philosophical and political messages Bacon could not have published openly. Her work was detailed, methodical, and convincing enough that several prominent intellectuals endorsed it. Then in 1894, Constance Mary Pott stopped publishing entirely. She had been working on a second volume, promising more explosive revelations. The volume never appeared. Her correspondence, preserved partially at the British Library, shows she received letters warning her against continuing her research. The senders' names were removed from the archived copies. Pott lived another 30 years, dying in 1924. She never wrote another word about Bacon or Shakespeare. She never explained her silence. Her unpublished notes were reportedly destroyed according to her explicit instructions. Mainstream scholars have since debunked Bacon-Shakespeare cipher theories generally, demonstrating that similar methods can extract any desired message from any sufficiently long text. Pott was likely chasing patterns that existed only in her methodology. But those warning letters remain in the archive, their authors' identities deliberately obscured. In Pott's complete silence for 3 decades, from a woman who had been passionate and prolific, suggests something other than mere academic defeat. Did Constance Mary Pott discover something in those ciphers that someone powerful wanted buried? We cannot say for certain, but her story reminds us that sometimes the most telling evidence is not what was found, but what was never allowed to be shared. I am Detective Nash, and these cases remain open.